Hello.
Hello, this is Dr. Mary McLaughlin, and we are going to be talking today with one of my favorite actors in the entire world, Miss Ashlie Atkinson, who is photographed right there. Let me just admit who's waiting here. I want to be sure to record this meeting, and right now, this is just my second time hosting one of these meetings. I want to be sure that I can find the recording, the thing that records it. I've got one that says pause recording and stop recording, but I don't have one that says start recording. Let me just be sure also that everyone is entered.
Hi, Mary. It's Tim Kerstetter. How are you?
Hi, Tim. And Renee McGar is here, Tim Kerstetter. And we have a couple more joining us. Oh, two more are waiting. Mark Parmalee and Christopher Parmalee. And, oh, here's somebody else. What I'd like to do today, may I call you Ashlie? Is that okay? Oh, I can't hear you.
Of course, absolutely.
Is that okay?
Yeah, for sure.
Please call me Mary.
Okay, great.
Yeah. Gee, there are a lot of people seem to be lining up here to get in. What I want to ask you today, we are a nonprofit. We focus on people who are at extraordinarily high risk of the COVID disease because they live in homeless shelters. My son Mark is here. Actually, he's a lawyer in New York. If you get into any trouble, he used to be a prosecutor there. So, although when I talk to him about it, he says, I say, if I ever get arrested, I'll give you a call. He said, well, all those times you let me stay in your
exactly.
home.
I never made him go to bed early, so maybe I'll have a better shot.
Yeah. So there are a lot of people living in my area of specialty, if you don't know, is psychiatric disabilities and brain injuries. And many of these people end up homeless. And that's what drew me to the streets between 15 and 20 years ago. So I've been out there working with this population for a long time. And it has always bothered me that they live in clustered, crowded in homeless shelters. I mean, I've literally been to an animal shelter where the dogs had way more room than people living in these homeless shelters. So, and even before COVID, people living in these environments were at such a staggering risk of death that they die on average 30 years younger than housed people. So now on top of that terrible risk, we have COVID, and they're living, many of them, still in these crammed shelters. So I wanted to focus on, you've posted publicly, Ashlie, about, oh, somebody's waiting to come in. You've posted publicly about your experience with the disease. You look very healthy now.
Thanks. I appreciate it. I sleep a lot, like a lot. I don't know how, I don't even know how people with children manage to recuperate from something like this. I have, I guess, a limited imagination, but I mean, we were sleeping 18 hours a day at one point, after the worst symptoms had left us even. So if I look good, it's because I've been sleeping a ton,
Excuse me just a moment. JL, are you here now? Can you be sure that I'm recording this meeting?
Yeah, you are. It says top left, you're recording. Good to go.
It is recording, okay. Now I've lost you. Let me see if I can get back.
Here, I'm not important.
Why am I?
What are you seeing now?
I'm seeing text on my screen. I'm going to have to go back in, I guess. I am so sorry, especially with you, Ashlie, where
Oh, about it. I mean, what else I got to do? You know what I mean?
you're a polished performer, and and you're used to much better professional.
That doesn't mean I know anything about computers, honestly.
Okay, here we are back again. Thank goodness I found my way without a GPS. How about that? All right, so you were talking about how you felt sleeping 18 hours.
Yeah. Yeah, I was just saying that you were being very kind and saying I look well, and I was saying I'm sleeping cat levels of sleep, you know.
Still?
So I think, I mean, we're down to, I'd say 12 hours a day of sleep, and I'm tired. Like, I could, if you were like, go to bed, I'd be like, gladly, right now. I got up 5 hours ago, and I would gladly go back to sleep right now.
Really?
Yeah, it's debilitating. Just even when every other symptom, the more worrisome symptoms have left, this seems to be lasting. Now, it's hard to know whether that is a manifestation entirely of the virus or whether it's also like being secluded and any sort of emotional components or psychological aspects to the ongoing situation that we're experiencing internationally. But I've talked to people that are sick, and it is a very different feeling. You get this sense of like, oh, I have to go to bed now, like now, or I'm going to pass out here. And then you go to bed for quite a time.
Wow. Well, you know, so it's very debilitating, it sounds like.
Oh, for sure. I think it would be terrifying to be in a situation where you were sleeping in a place, if you were sick in a place where you felt vulnerable. I think it would be terrifying to have this level. And I mean, this is the least terrifying of the symptoms that we experienced, but to be this sleepy this often, to be unconscious, you know, I think would be really, really scary if you were in a place where you didn't feel safe.
Can you, well, this is what, you know, our people are dealing with. And
yeah.
I'm hoping, you know, chaos always presents an opportunity if we look for it. And my hope is that somehow we can come out of this crisis doing better for these people that, you know, have to live in these overcrowded environments. But, you know, you described, I corresponded with a woman, you know, a couple of days ago who is sick now. She described the sleeping that you just described, but she described as well this intense emotional turmoil. She said she was crying a lot, and just feared that she would die. Did you experience that like a wide range of emotions about this?
Not really. I think I also am somebody who lives with a pretty intense condition. You know what I mean? So I have an ascending aortic aneurysm, so I'm always a little like, it could, you know, there's a 4% chance of me just like kicking it at any moment. But I didn't really have those swings about my own mortality. If I had an emotional reaction, I think, first of all, I just felt so sick that there was no, the smallest thing felt overwhelming, you know, between the nausea and the fatigue and the lethargy, like there was no ability to achieve anything or do the simplest of tasks. I also felt an overwhelming despair as I continue to see. I mean, I'm with you, Mary. I hope. I mean, the optimist in me hopes and prays for a situation when we get on the other side of this first hump, where we are kinder and also like recognizing each other's humanity more, and recognizing that the most vulnerable of us deserves the most attention and not the other way around. But I despair when I see what's starting to look just like a land grab. You know what I mean? When companies, like multi-million-dollar companies, are going in and getting small business loans, and senators are offloading stocks,
Yes.
you know, and using their information not to help the people that, not just like their fellow man, but like their constituents, you know, and instead using it for personal profit. I think, I don't know what that sea change would be. I have to believe there's more of us than them, you know. But I think if I've been in despair or in turmoil, it's been about that sort of thing, about the larger repercussions of this.
Well, I wanted to ask you, what do you think about how the crisis is being managed by, because you're in New York City right now. Is that way? Are you still there?
Oh yeah. I live in Brooklyn, New York. I think managed is
Exaggeration, right?
yeah. I think that's
Hyperbole.
too much credit to the people. Yeah. I don't think at a national level that it's being managed at all. I see this tug of war, and then there's this constant sort of flow of information where we're hearing, like, you know, there were ventilators and then they got bought and they weren't allowed to be distributed, and then, you know, a couple of weeks ago, Jared Kushner referring to the federal stockpile as ours and not the states, and it's like, well, who do you mean when you say ours if you don't mean there's not a non-state component to the citizens of this nation? I mean, I don't see management happening. What I do see at a grassroots level is communities that can coming together and helping other people in their community. And I think that's the most hope I get out of this. You know, New York is a very neighborhood-based place, and I see people coming together to help the people that are out of work, the people that are sick in their neighborhood, and that is encouraging. I have friends who are doctors and nurses all around the United States, and then other people that are other essential workers. And those are the people that I have faith in. Those are the people that I believe in and that I trust. You know, I don't see, even Cuomo, who I think a lot of New Yorkers have sort of, you know, glommed onto an absence of a real inspirational figure in the White House. I think a lot of New Yorkers have started listening to Cuomo and sort of got very excited about him rather prematurely, as he just released a budget that, I mean, austerity measures don't even cut it. He is sort of kneecapping all social nets in order to prop up business administrations, and it's a bummer. It's a real shame.
I spoke with someone this weekend, and they, of course, you know, the United States incarcerates, it's been said, more people than any country on earth. I mean, we have prisons all over the place. So this man is head of an organization trying to get people out of Rikers Island.
Yes, which is necessary and and is immediate need and should have happened ages ago.
And the criticism is that Governor Cuomo has been resisting letting them out, whereas Governor Newsom in California has been more.
Yes, absolutely. I do like. I don't. I hesitate to sort of speak on Governor Newsom because I don't live there and I don't have any real experience under his administration. But I do certainly on that point, and also on things like sort of quarantine and social distancing. Governor Newsom was one of the first people, I think, to sort of start enacting these measures. But yeah, Rikers, there's a correctional facility here in Brooklyn that, among other things, did not have light or heat for a certain amount of the winter until social pressure, sort of community pressure, made sure that the heat came back on in the correctional facility, and I just can't imagine, especially because of our tendency to incarcerate for nonviolent offenses and the rate of incarceration for people of color versus white people, people who are in vulnerable situations. I know that they feel like sitting ducks in those facilities, and it's the definition of cruel and unusual to make people stay in those facilities when this is going on.
Well, our concern, of course, is that reports are that between 30 and 40% of the inmates have psychiatric disabilities, major mental illnesses as well. And, the man I just mentioned who works to try to get people out, those people out of prison, thinks it's as high as 60%. So, and of course, my homeless people, the population I work with, they're in and out of jails and prisons all the time. I mean, I have one man who's been incarcerated 16 different times. It's like a revolving door. They get arrested constantly. Let me ask you.
Wait, can I ask you a question about that? I have a couple questions about that. How much the people that are sort of repeatedly incarcerated, how much of that is a systemic mishandling of psychiatric issues, and how much of that is just a criminalization of the poor, would you say?
Well,
I realize those two things are related, obviously, but.
Well, I mean, I think it's both, but the one I know the most about is the psychiatric services. And I mean, I don't want to tell you more than you want to know about this, but.
No, I'm an information hound, please.
Okay, first of all, all the psychiatric hospitals were closed during the Reagan
administration.
Yeah. And the idea was they'd all go get some help, but the help didn't arrive. These people ended up, that's when I come from Boston, and that's where I first started to see, I mean, I'm in Syracuse, New York now, that's where I live, but I was born and raised in Boston. So every time I went back there, I started to see people sleeping in the doorways of big cathedrals and, public buildings. And it was like shocking to me because I went to college in Boston. I was walking those streets every single day for 4 years. So the help wasn't provided, but at the same time, and people don't seem to realize this medicine, the field of medicine is thousands of years old. It goes back to the time of Hippocrates. Whatever treatments you're going to get for your physical illnesses are generally well-established, well-studied treatments. Psychology, the field of psychology goes back to Freud, which is a little over 100 years ago. So, we don't have the long history of developing and studying treatments that work. So, when I started my PhD program, when actually my son was in high school when I started, so it wasn't as long ago as you would think. The first thing I saw was a book of outcome studies for all the treatments that people were doing those days. And there was not one of them back then where getting that treatment gave you a better chance of getting well than just doing nothing at all. So, the treatments, so then the HMOs started to take over.
I mean, that reads like Foucault, you know what I mean? Like the idea of madness as something that cannot be considered upon the same line. I don't know. I've been reading a lot of his Man of Madness recently.
Well, I haven't read that. What is it?
It's really interesting. His basic, I hope I'm not getting this wrong, his basic tenet, if I remember correctly, is that madness is madness, which is his term for a panoply of psychiatric issues, is something that cannot be considered, that we, by talking about madness, that we've already created a construct where there is the sick and there is the well, and one is good and one is bad, and one is sought to be incorporated into the other. And that,
all human behavior is distributed on a normal curve. The bell-shaped curve, the one.
yeah.
There are people in both tails of the distribution that are, if you apply it to politics, for example, there are people on the far left and on the far right. Well, human behavior is distributed the same way.
Right, and it's majority opinion, right? Like it's a matter of majority rule to a certain degree.
Well, the majority decides, in other civilizations, we thought people who had hallucinations were seers or prophets. We didn't call them mentally ill. So, there are books with a title like The Myth of Mental Illness. I mean, is there such a thing at all, or just extremes of behavior that now we're calling mental illness? So, but nevertheless, I just want to mention this quickly, one of the other problems is most of the people who have been for years treating what we call psychiatric mental illness, for lack of a better term, it's the only field in medicine where people don't exactly study the organ, the brain. And, so now, I mean, one of the things I studied in school would be like neuroscience. I mean, I think we have to be looking at not just the behavior that you see, but we need to be looking at people's brains. And, we know what's happening to brains that have been injured, like the football player.
Right, like CTE and things like that.
Exactly, yeah. So, and that affects behavior profoundly. So, we always need to be looking at brain. So the field has a long way to go. But nevertheless, while we're awaiting better treatments, we can't just put people in jails and prisons,
Right.
I mean, in my opinion, that makes them infinitely worse. I think environmental factors are a very great contributor to psychiatric. I mean, if you grow up in a household that's full of turmoil, you're going to probably end up with some mental health problems. So imagine in a prison, what would happen. I want to focus on you though, because, it's easy to get me going on topics like this. And I
could keep going. I'm like, oh, that's so interesting, because I was just watching A Woman Under the Influence the other day, and I was like, this is such an interesting, whatever. And then it got into Lanier and all this sort of stuff, but it's a whole nother thing.
But I would agree,
we'll have that conversation another day.
Yeah, but I'm very interested in the book that you just, Man and Madness, right?
I think that's what it's called. Let me look. I am now forgetting the title.
Yeah, you can
But
text
let's keep
it to me.
talking, and I'll tell you what it is. I'll find it. Hold on.
Okay.
But what were you gonna ask me?
Now, while you're taking a moment doing that, I have someone on here who is actually is my grandson, and he is a film student. So I want to introduce him to you.
Oh, very cool. By the way, that book is Madness and Civilization.
Oh, okay.
And
Madness.
it's just a critique of historical method and how we classify madness as a relative term to. Anyway, yeah, I'd love to meet him.
He's here, Chris Parmalee. He's studying at the. Can you talk to us, Christopher? Are you there? I just unmuted you. Yeah.
Yeah, Mom. I mean, Dad.
Hi. I just want to make sure that you have an opportunity to meet Ashlie Atkinson.
Hi, Chris. How's it going?
He's going out to LA to do what he's supposed to if they don't close LA over the summer, but he's supposed to be going there for an internship, and he was at the Cannes Film Festival as a production intern.
Fantastic. That's so cool.
Yeah. So that's Christopher Parmalee. So let me ask you this. When you, what's happening, there are thousands of people sick in New York now. So what happens when they go out and about, when they get well and go out and about? How does people treat them?
I don't know. I haven't gone out. I truly haven't. I've been in my house since. And I mean, I think for the most part, we're not out and about. I have a friend who took pictures of, he was deemed essential and went into Manhattan and took an Uber into Manhattan and took pictures from the back seat. And out of a dozen pictures, which include Times Square, the Flatiron Building, Canal Street, there is one person in the 9 photos he took crossing the street.
Oh, that's shocking.
I mean,
Oh.
and I've heard that in Borough Park there was a funeral that was held for a prominent rabbi. Apparently there are house parties happening in Fort Greene that are popping off. There are isolated incidents of people being out and congregating, but for the most part, I think we are staying in our tiny, tiny little apartments for the duration.
And how do you get food? It's delivered then?
Yes, or my friends who are well are masking and staying, I think it's just graduated from 6 to 13 feet apart if they can.
Mm-hmm.
And the few friends that have cars bring and drop things off. I know that my husband and I and several other of our friends, when we have needed groceries, have done like one big grocery buy and then tipped the driver and who is also the shopper. And I wouldn't say exorbitant, but I mean, we're tipping $40, $50 to per delivery just because they are in the mouth of the lion, basically. And if they're going to be working, then it's the one thing we can do to try and make their day a little easier and better.
We messaged each other about discrimination that you thought you were seeing towards the Chinese population. Do you think that's continuing?
I don't think that is actually primarily a New York issue. I have a friend who is a nurse in Vermont who was spat upon by a man whose life she was saving. I do know that all of the dim sum places in Sunset Park in my neighborhood have, I think there were 7, and I think 1 will maybe survive out of this. I think, honestly, I think New Yorkers, even though we're not all into it, but I mean, and by saying into it, I mean we're not all sort of educating ourselves on what really is or is not a threat. And there is racism in New York for sure. But most of the stories I've been hearing have been coming from other places. I think we are very used certainly in my part of Brooklyn, we're very used to being surrounded by all sorts of different types of folks, you know?
How did you know you had this disease? Were you able to get a test? How did
Yes.
you know you were getting something this weird and peculiar?
I will regret for probably the rest of my life the fact that on March 3rd, I don't regret going to see Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf at the theater with Laurie Metcalf and Rupert Everett. It was amazing. But then the morning after that, my husband and I left New York and went to Pittsburgh for a trip. Our friend is a musician, a country musician. Well, I guess he's more rock and roll now. Whatever. Our friend Sturgill Simpson was playing a show in Pittsburgh, and we really wanted to go see him because we weren't going to be in town when he played Madison Square Garden. So we met up with a friend of ours who flew in from LA the 4th through the 8th. And we saw Sturgill, who had just come back from touring in Europe. And we went on the bus and we had a bunch of beers and I kissed him on the cheeks and all this sort of stuff. And then we came back the 8th. And by the 10th, we were both incredibly ill. Now, I don't know if I got sick from Josh or from Sturgill or from anyone who touched the screens at the Warhol Museum where we also went or stayed at the hotel we slept in. You know, there's a million, or used the same rest area we did. I mean, we drove from New York to Pittsburgh, and I myself am sort of still incredibly guilty feeling, and I think I will continue to be forever, about my possible chain of transmission and if I unknowingly shed the disease between New York and Pittsburgh and back. But at that time...
Wait a minute. We can't be guilty about something we didn't deliberately do, you know. Ashlie, just 1 second. We are going to, this meeting is scheduled for 40 minutes and we have 6 minutes of time left. So I just want to give you a 6-minute notice.
Okay, yeah. I'm talking a lot.
I want to hear what you say. I just don't want you to be cut off in the middle of it.
Yeah. So that to be said, that I, on the 3rd, when we went to the theater, it was then in the New York Post. We felt terrible on the 10th, and we had all these symptoms that had not really been diagnosed as COVID-19 symptoms yet. We had loss of smell and taste, fatigue, lethargy, diarrhea, nausea, all of these things. We did not have any sort of nose interactions or any cold symptoms.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was like, well, I don't know. I just feel terrible. But then we read in the New York Post on the 13th that an usher at Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf on that evening had tested positive for COVID-19. Now, I don't think we got it from that usher. I think we got it somewhere between New York and Pittsburgh, or Josh got it on the plane, or Sturgill got it in Europe. We all got sick right around the same time. But because we could go into the urgent care and say, We were at this show. This usher tested positive. It meant that on the 14th, we were able to receive a test because they were saying you had to have symptoms.
Mhm.
You had to test negative for the flu, which we both did. I also presented with pneumonia, which I think was also like a thing. And now we realize that comorbidity is like a big signal.
Mhm.
And we had a possible chain of transmission. So those things allowed us to get tested on the 14th, and then we found out we were positive.
Now, let me ask you this. This is a subject in the news now. The drug that the Trump administration or Donald Trump is recommending, what's hydroxychloroquine?
Yeah.
Were you prescribed that?
No.
And you're recovered without it?
Yeah, and we didn't go to the hospital. So we were never on ventilators. We were never intubated, anything like that. I do use a CPAP machine at night, and I do think, actually, weirdly, that I think that may have helped me to recover quicker than my husband, despite the fact that I also had pneumonia. Because I think my recovery was a little quicker than his. I also, one of the reasons that we went to urgent care is we have one of these.
What is that?
That is a pulse oximeter.
Oh.
And they are now saying that one of the things that that COVID-19 does is it deflates your air sacs, but it doesn't make your lungs rigid. So, and I have friends who are that are hospital employees that say this, that they've never had a situation where people are oxygenating in the 70% when anything below 95 is problematic. And they are talking on their phones as they're hooking them up to ventilators. Any other illness, by the time that your lungs are that compromised and your oxygen level is that low, your whole body should be fighting to breathe. But there is something about COVID-19 that makes it so that you don't know that you are suffering from hypoxia. You're just breathing faster, which then further inflames your lungs, which then accelerates the process.
So what you're saying is you're having that pulse oximeter. It gave you a measure of how much oxygen saturation you were getting, right?
Exactly. We had no shortness of breath. We had no chest pains, but I was oxygenating at 88%.
Below 90.
Low.
Mhm.
Below 95 is an
Oh,
issue.
below 95 is the next.
97, 98 is like, anything below 95 you should be looking at.
Now, we have just a couple of 2 minutes left. Can you buy those in drugstores anywhere?
Yeah, this was a CVS one. Now, granted, they're not going to work as well as the ones in the hospital, and there are bugs, but I think generally, as an indicator,
Mhm.
it's a good thing. They're about $25,
Oh,
which is
so they're
expensive.
reasonably priced, yeah.
Yes.
I want to thank you. I know you're tired, and I just appreciate the effort that you made to join us today. And
No, Mary, thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
and the effort that you made to hang in there for this entire period of time, even though you're probably going to go right back to bed because
I might.
exhausted. Well, that sounds like a good plan. But anyway, I'm very happy to meet you in person.
It's so nice to meet you.
And I just want to mention quickly, the first time I saw you perform was in an episode of Bull. And I thought you were wonderful. So I looked up the credits to see who that actor was who played, it was a woman who was being falsely accused of killing her husband.
Yes.
And you were playing, I think, Page 6 type reporter.
Yeah. I was a biographer of sort of, fact sheet, sort of slanted biographer.
It's a wonderful performance. And so,
Thank you so much, Mary.
So I've been very tuned into what's going on in your career ever since then. And of course, you did accept my Facebook friend request.
Well, and I also am so grateful. I keep an eye and read very gratefully of your work and the efforts you make, not just professionally, but just taking your personal time to sort of always chime in advocacy for the more vulnerable among us. And I really, really appreciate all the work that you do.
Thank you very much. Yeah, a lot of us do this. I'll just quickly tell you, J.L. Faverio is a computer guru out in California. He's Boylan Point Agency, Boylan, if you need any help out there in California when you're out there. He's been donating time to help us with our IT things for years. And then, of course, you can see Tim Kerstetter on here. He is the chairman of the board of our nonprofit. My son, Mark, who is there with the navy blue hat on his head, he is on our nonprofit. And I think that, we're all doing, and none of us gets paid. I don't get paid either. I donate my services and my time, which is, leaves us running out of money all the time. So, because the donations everywhere are falling,
Yes.
I mean, we need funds to help our people. If I had more money, I'd go out to the street and put a bunch of people into motels, but I don't have the funds to do that, But anyway, we might get cut off, and I don't want that to happen. But maybe someday when you feel better, I would love it if you'd come back and join us.
I would love to.
We could talk about it sounds like you have a lot of interest in mental health.
I do. I have a great amount of interest in that. And what I know is far surpassed by what I want to know. So I would love to have that conversation.
Well, we'll do that then. And I want to thank you very, very much. And especially, as I said, for all the effort that it took to work with us here today. Thank you, everybody, for coming. I regret that it's such a short meeting, but
it's nice to meet you all.
Take care.
You too. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody, for coming. And JL, especially, thank you. Bye-bye, Rini. My cousin, Rini. Yeah. Thank you, Ashlie, very much. I'm going to end the meeting.
All right. Bye-bye.
Get well. Continue to get well.
Thank you so much. Stay safe out there, Mary.
Yes. Well, I'm quarantined, too, so I'm losing my mind. But what do you do? Thank you.
We'll play Words with Friends or something.
Yeah. Bye-bye, everybody. Bye-bye.